Hi there. Who else thinks they're in the wrong class at 9:30 in the morning? Because shared coordinates is like the most important thing you want to talk about right now. That's tough luck because they closed the doors. So welcome to Shared Coordinates, Tales of Two Bavarian American Cities. I know you all love that title so much. My name is Lindsay Dubasar. I'm the Director of Design Technology for Hart Howerton. We are a multidisciplinary architectural, urban planning, interiors, and landscape firm. We're just going to throw in everything and, give our hand at it. I have over 15 years of experience in the building design industry. I've worked many roles over the years, as you can see. I've worked for architects. I am trained as an architect and an urban designer. I am also have a lot of experience in MEP and structural engineering and as a lighting designer, because clearly I couldn't make up my mind. No, I am something called greedy for knowledge and just wanted to be the best well-rounded individual. Don't worry, my therapist is still kind of working on that. So how did I end up here? Well, I ask myself that every day. So essentially, we're going to talk about shared coordinates today because, it's everyone's favorite. If your favorite, you mean pain in the ass. What are they and why are they important? Some people have no idea. How many of you are civil engineers in the audience? So you hate me already as an architect? What'd I do to you? Strongly feel against me, yes. Okay. How many of you are architects? Okay. Sort of my people. You got it? MEP, structures, and consulting engineers? The rest of you just fell into the wrong class? Cool. Oh, GCs. That's why you hate me. Okay. Got it. So shared coordinates are pretty important. When combining multiple models, as it says, in a single project, they are probably one of the most important things you can do, even though people think that that's not true. Waking up in the morning is the most important thing you can do. So we use them to establish positions, especially if you have multiple files that you need to align, which if you're using BIM, as you know, even if you're not using BIM, you're using CAD or Civil 3D, you still need everything to be in the right place. So are they the same for everyone? Generalized feelings about that? That would be a no, right? Yeah, okay. So I really wish, because if Autodesk could figure that one out, I swear I would just come work for them and just call it a day. But no, there are global coordinates, there are GIS coordinates, grid coordinates, as you can see, project-based, state planes, and then our favorite term, shared coordinates. Now, shared coordinates mean nothing to anybody who doesn't use Revit. They just want to hear geolocation. So we'll talk a little bit about the relativity of internal origin and the base point and the survey point and your levels, just because I want to give a general background for you. If it's too boring, I won't, shun you for looking at your phone. It's fine. Survey point is something that orients the building, as it says, in geometry in the survey system. It is used in Revit to base your shared coordinate system off of. Now, there's also a project base point, because one thing to work on was not enough. Project base point is something that establishes the distances that's there, the measurements that are there, but it is pertaining to each individual file. And then there's the geographic location, which just tells you where it is in the real world, but in reality, in a Revit file, doesn't do crap. It's fine. So this is how I try to describe it to my staff. You have an origin point of the file. Most files do. Then you have a survey point, which relatively revolves around the origin point. You have your base point, which also revolves around your origin point and your survey point. The survey point will dictate where it is in space or in the real world, and then your project base point is where that file is around everything else. So just to give you guys like a little brief using one of the practice projects that are there, Your survey point, which is being indicated now, if you press on it, right, you click, you end up seeing your elevational, your northing, your easting, and a little paperclip, which is the hell that we go through. So the paperclip itself, if you're leaving it unclipped, is shifting the space itself and saying it's staying the same wherever you put it. If you unclip it, it changes that location. So you end up getting really used to unclipping, clipping again. Whoever decided to mess up the file that day. The project base point, which is being indicated, that's going to tell you where those levels are going to sit. So the levels themselves, because more complications are great, there's two different ways to do that. You can tell that project base point in the levels to be showing whether or not it's relative to the survey point itself or relative based off of sea level. Again, those are one of those things too that's a hard thing with the contractors. No offense, guys. But my favorite question is when somebody goes, can we show both? No, not without a lot of extra work. Please don't ask that question. We hate it. It's okay. You want to coordinate with your contractor as much as humanly possible. And see, you guys like me again when I say that. It's true. Like the earlier you do that, the earlier you talk to a civil engineer, the earlier you talk to all your consultants about what their preference is, the better off you're going to be. A lot of architects, don't hate me now, a lot of designers in general, again, don't hate me, end up being in a silo. So how often do we end up giving a civil survey before the project design starts? Has anyone ever had that happen? Oh, one. Damn, you're lucky. Okay, well, you don't count for this one thing. I have never worked on a project as an architect where I have received civil information before somebody decided to jump the gun and start designing on a project. And I really wish I will one day. Who knows? The biggest thing is when you sit down and try to figure it out, you don't want to ruin everyone's lives by setting them up and then making them start all over and causing extra work, because then the client gets a little pissed off at you when you add an ad service on to the end of the day and you say, well, I worked an extra 15 hours to adjust my files. We all love that one. So do you need to establish them? Guesses? I see yeses in this and a no. Honestly, no, you don't have to. So not technically, right? However, do they make site coordination easier? That's where everybody goes, yes, they do. Hell yes, they do. Are they a pain in the ass to set up? Yes, they are. So who's responsible for establishing them? Yellow answers. BIM coordinator, architect. Everyone else in the room is covering their eyes right now saying, not me. Whoever wants to do it, it's a race, man. And I did not have enough coffee for that. So there are a lot of deciding factors. Typically, do you end up seeing an architect do it? Yes, because obviously we think we're God. It's fine. No, it's a contractual agreement can stipulate it, right? Your client can sit down and say, I want you to take the lead, or they can say, work with our contractor who we've worked through, with for 20 years. It can be an engineer I've seen do it, only because, others don't know how necessarily, or because they have a specific way they want to do it. Good luck with that. Architects will not appreciate it. I'm not saying I don't appreciate it. I love the go-getting. Could it be the civil? Chances probably not. And that's okay. So whoever's prime necessarily will probably, set it up. Then you get into the design architect versus an architect of record. That's always a fun war. I want to do it. No, I want to do it. You don't know how. Yeah, love those phone calls. So I'm going to go over what we in our firm end up calling our easy method. Now, brace yourselves, it's not like the most wonderful thing in the world, but it is the thing that we ended up doing and find, okay, it's the lesser of evils, right? It's less of a pain in the ass to do. So what we do is we end up exporting a streamlined AutoCAD background. And by us exporting, I mean not the architect, right? So we end up receiving a civil survey most of the time. And that is what you want to base this file off of. We create a holistic, a singular file for shared coordinates that ends up getting shared amongst all of the consultants. And that file is usually based off of the survey. I say usually because there are instances where your survey point or the information is miles and miles and miles and miles away, like miles. Now, who in here knows that Revit doesn't really function that well away from an origin point? All of you, just raise your, it's okay. Yeah, no, they haven't quite figured that out yet. One day, probably not, in like 2050. Essentially what we end up doing is, if it's within reason, we take the civil survey point, or the civil survey, I should say, we import it into, there we go, so we create a standalone file, we import it into, after cleaning it, and I have to say clean it because no offense to the civil engineers, there's a whole lot of crap in there I can't handle. It's just a lot. So we clean it, showing usually the site boundary, and we ask you, we work with you to specify what of those control points we're going to use as our shared coordinate point. All you need is one, not 4,050. However, it takes about 6 months to try to get the point across that we only need one. Sorry. And that's for everybody. We're not great at communication. So you need 1 point. You bring in that file to true north. That's very important, is how we do that. We set 2 levels. We set one at sea level, which is our 0, 0, just for the shared coordinate file, as it's stating. The other is going to be where our coordinates, like the survey file or the CAD link, not import. Please don't import. Makes me sad. Link the CAD, because you will end up getting updated information inevitably, or at least I hope so, based off of Civil's info. And that is where we're going to place that one file, right? So it seems relatively easy. The other thing you're not seeing on the left-hand side, we have deleted everything out of this file that we possibly can. Purge the hell out of it. No sheets, no schedules, no nothing. All we have are the base views that we need, and it's really only one plan view, and it's going to be a couple of elevations if we need them, and that's about it, right? There is a strategy behind that method so people don't get confused later on. So we're sitting down, we're labeling everything because, you know, we have the most patience in the world to be able to do that. And only BIM people right now and managers and coordinators will sit down and say the importance of this. If you ask a designer, they're going to sit down and leave it. View 1, View 2, View 383, because it's super helpful. We're going to sit down and we're going to indicate and move that survey point, as we're saying, based off of the information, which we have also left in that file so that people just have to see it in their face. We're going to place that survey point after we've unclipped it, entered the information. That way we can put that survey point wherever the hell we want. It could be on Jupiter, and I'm still saying it's on Earth. However, our mileage restriction in Revit might have an issue with that. So after that, you want to place your project base point, and that is relative per file. We tend to leave it in the origin point. It's way easier to handle, just for the shared coordinate file, not for the individual building files, right? Then we go through and we make sure that everything is where it needs to be elevationally, because we check 4,000 times to make sure we didn't mess this up and have to do it again. And then you pin everything as much as you possibly can. And also, the reason we have a separate file is because we don't really want sticky finger syndrome happening, right? I don't want anyone touching my single source of truth. So we use BIM 360 or ACC or whatever they're calling it after our keynote this year. It is really important for us, especially in a cloud-based environment, that we make sure we get this right, and then nobody ever touches it other than people who understand how it affects everything. As you can see, we purged 3 times. Who knows why we purged 3 times? Not one of you knows why? Nesting. It's a pain in the ass. 3 times will get you your magic number. After we do that, we're now pretty much theoretically set to acquire the shared coordinates, okay? So you're going to sit down and you're going to bring that file into your building files, your individual building files, whether it's MEP, whether it's structures, architecture, site file, you name it, it's going to be brought in. Now, again, we label everything. We put them on the appropriate work set because I love giving lectures on how, standards are followed every day. We all follow them, right? Yes. Not really. We always link in based off of internal origin. The reason we do that is because this file will float in space. It's not set up yet, right? It doesn't have the coordinates set up. Now, what you just saw was why we only have one plan view. We set it up by linked view because it's 2D information. By doing that, you're ensuring you're seeing exactly what we did in the shared coordinate file. There is only one option when you sit down and say by linked view. There should be no confusion after that. Does that mean we still get phone calls? Yes, sadly. We then are moving this file in place, and some of you are like, why are you moving it? Shouldn't it just be set up that way? No, sadly, because all of these files are usually worked on already. We're in the design period. I love it. I had a landscape engineer, a landscape designer say, oh, well, we flipped all the surveys upside down so that we could, adjust it based off of the architectural file. I cringed, cried a little. I got over it. And then I said, well, there are ways we do things, and that is not one of them. So the reason we use this file is we're doing the same thing as what he thought to do, just never touch the survey because that is a single source of truth. And also your civil engineers will cuss you out behind your back. So we're sitting down, we're putting everything where it needs to be. We create a separate set of views that are directly on each of the building models so that if anything ever happens, which it inevitably will, we are able to go to those views. We are able to sit down and say, okay, where did it go awry? So once everything's in place, we've oriented this file, we've made sure in location it's where it needs to be, our northing, our elevation, our easting, everything is golden. We sit down and we say, okay, let's acquire. So, oh no, what happened? I clicked it too early, right? Well, thank God Autodesk finally put in a reset shared coordinates button. Otherwise, you're sitting down and starting this all over again. As you can see there, we also have a reference plane because that one spot, depending on your graphics card and everything else, will appear to be over here when it's really over here. And they're saying they're the same thing, but they're not. So we use reference planes just to align. We're making this as easy as we can for anybody to understand. We also provide step-by-step instructions of what we're going over now. Also, those are included in your handout, so you're welcome. That's my life's work. I'm retiring now. I wish. Vacation. So we're sitting down and saying, okay, acquire from this file. What I often see as the biggest error is that, well, people don't read, because that's a given, right? Like, why would we do that? They will almost always acquire from a site file. So we have our landscape designers working in Revit, which is fantastic because it really works well for coordination. However, what that also means is your site file is chock full of good stuff, meaning so heavy that every time if you were to sit down and load a site file into every building, you're adding that much weight, that much more, megabyte or gigabyte, depending on what the situation is, to the individual building file. You're also going to eventually get a circular chain of reference, or I'm not nesting this, and blah, blah, blah. So we specifically create this file because there's nothing in it. It's 2D line work. It couldn't be more streamlined and smaller. If you sit down and do it from a site file, that's okay. You can. You're just going to struggle if this is like a huge project. We work on large planning projects majority of the time. I don't know about you, but we've always had the one person say, I can't open the file today. Oh, well, you can go home now. No, not one of those options. So, we're aligning. We're doing the same thing all over again. And it's just so much easier that way. So my favorite phone call at 8 o'clock in the morning, because I field them from both coasts. It's great. Help! Something went wrong. What do I do if it's messed up? Well, okay, so part of the case study and the Bavarian-esque, influence We have one of these projects. This particular project is in Montana. It's Yellowstone. We call it, Yellowstone. It is a beautiful project. Who wouldn't want to be there, right? It's great. We also use our Revit file for our rendering. Also another important reason while shared coordinates are super important, because if you change them halfway through, I'm going to get another phone call from my renderer saying, what WTF is happening now? All of my work is different. And I know all the contractors out there is like, I really don't give a crap about your renderings right now. I have to construct something. It's okay, I know. It's my job to give a crap, it's fine. So, this particular project, we found out in the middle of CDs, right? We had one gentleman go through and say, something's not aligning properly, which is the best phone call to hear, like 20 to 30% CDs. Yep, okay, so he went through and tried to find it. It was off by 3.5 inches. A lot of you are like, oh, big whoop. When I sit down and the contractor is going to say, like, I'm not going to care about that. However, what happens if the project has multiple phases over 15 years? So a building already exists. It's great. How do I actually align that? Well, he goes, the CAD's over here. It's shifted over here. The next day, it was a different location because no one can figure out who's grabbing it by accident. Accidents happen. They make me twitch, but they happen. Then all of a sudden we get a call from our structural engineer saying, well, all of our columns are misaligned. It's great. Spectacular. Awesome. Let me spend the next 4 or 5 days on the phone with you to figure out why. So everybody else sat down and goes, well, it's just 3 inches. They keep ignoring it all over again. We ended up finding out that, and here's the important thing, someone picked the wrong file again. They acquired from individual, building files and thinking that was the case. It happens fine. Unfortunately, now we do have to fix it, and it takes a lot of time to do that. And who has to pay that? Money is time, time is money, all of those things. So what ended up happening, and I'm not, it does happen, when people set up their backgrounds, if you're not extremely precise and your dimensions are extremely precise, the precision on, this was off by like 0.006358, like any influence of pi in rotation. Not off by the same everywhere, but in rotation, and we had no idea where the hell the rotation started. It was great. It was a great day. So what had to happen, I spent the next week and a half fixing about 82 files. I did it for everybody. I did it for all the consultants too, because they sat there and thought I was like gonna kill them or something when they're like, I don't know, I don't want to touch it. Neither did I. I mean, geez, you do it. We fixed it. It was great, I swear. Will there be another instance of this? Almost definitely. I just don't want to receive the phone call. I'm going to forward that to the rest of my team. Sorry, Jeff. Here's another one for you, because, we all have that. And I already know and understand the civil will say this, but how many of the architectural designers in here, et cetera, understand about vertical datums? Because I had to educate the hell out of myself about this. Also, giant nerd, so I found it fascinating. It's fine. Maybe not for you. You guys can tune out and watch your phone. There are so many of them based off of time, right? One of the biggest thing about the projects that we do, especially in our firm, we have clients for many years, decades, who have started one thing, then went to another, then went to another. And so we have buildings on buildings on buildings, entire valleys, right? So I'm going to go through, and we're going to watch a little bit about how we're the geodatic, just kidding, there we go. What datums are, how they're established.
Do you ever think about how location information impacts your work? Accurate positions and elevations are critical to construction projects, floodplain mapping, scientific endeavors, and much, much more. Surveyors use scientific instruments and field procedures to collect information about positions, distances, and elevations. Then, this information is used to create geodetic datums, reference frames used at a national level to assure consistency across mapping applications. Geodetic reference frames have a long history in the United States, dating back to the 1800s. In 1807, President Jefferson signed the act that established the Survey of the Coast. Work started by measuring angles and distances between points across the country. This formed a triangulation network that continued to be densified over the years. This network would become the basis of the future horizontal datums.
Okay, how are geodetic datums established? Pretty easy, right? We did that. I just gave you a massive history lesson that all of you did not want. History nerd, deal with it. So here's the thing. We sat down and had this project happen, and we say, okay, here's where NAVD 88 is based off of when it was measured and established. Here's where the sea level is. Here's this, here's that. Here in the world, triangulation, it's fantastic. I actually do think it's fantastic. Then we have a project which may look similar to the last project because we do a lot of projects for ski resorts. It's okay. This particular project got an email one day, just a very small email. We had the whole thing has to be resurveyed because the last survey that was done was 15 years prior. So okay, we hire, the client hires the surveyor who's supposed to work directly with the civil engineer because that happens really well all the time too. And I get this email saying, oh, by the way, we're using the new datum. Excuse me? Okay, sure, why not? Then all of a sudden we get these new survey files, right? And again, nothing's aligning. So I start looking in elevation and I start looking in, plan, and I say, like 3D, like I don't understand. And so I call up our civil engineer. I'm like, does this look a little wrong to you? And he's just like, literally nothing is where you think it is. Now, someone just told me that my entire universe is different. So 5 feet over there isn't really 5 feet over there anymore. It's like 25 feet over there, but then that building is about 35 feet off of where we thought it was over here because the land changes over the year. Whether it is tectonic movement, whatever it might be, rocks fall, wherever those points are that they took it from originally are no longer where they are now. Cool. What do I do with my shared coordinate file? I don't know. Well, okay, great. So we sat down and had to establish, because we already had built buildings, all of a sudden the property line was no longer where we thought it was. And our buildings, existing buildings, according to the new data, were over our property line. Because, city loves to hear that. Great. So we did the best we could. They weren't going to penalize us for it. We had to create brand new shared coordinates. Unfortunately, this project, a bit of a blunder when it sits down. It's an entire valley. We're talking miles and miles and miles. So we have multiple shared coordinate files, and they're all different. It's okay, just depending on the region that we've developed. Sometimes that has to happen. It's not ideal. I'd love to have a single source of truth, but depending on what we develop and what phase you're in, that's just what happens. So are there alternative methods to how to handle this and how to establish this? Yeah, of course there are. This is just what we have figured out to be the easiest for us and how to maintain them and help our consultants do it. Unlike a lot of my architectural peers, and I'm not being sarcastic, I swear, I feel the pain as a consultant because I've worked as one before. So every change shifts. We have to increase our staffing. We have to increase the amount of time that we have to dedicate to this, where I can't put it on another project because a client loves to hear you're not focusing on their stuff 24/7. And that's just what happens. So there are multiple ways to do this. There is a tool that says locate. There is a tool that says acquire. Do they always work? Nope. Still working on that one too. There are plugins that say, how do I establish, shared coordinates? We're going to do it for you. Cool. I'm out of a job. Again, I'm going to retire. This is great. It depends on how bad, how complex the situation is, and how you're comfortable doing it. I hope that you see that this is just one of those ways, and maybe it's a little easier for you to understand why we do it this way. Do things happen? Every day. Bad things happen every day, especially in the file. Sticky finger syndrome, all up in there. Do we have to take a break and take a walk and breathe through it? Yes, but it can be fixed. We used to think it couldn't be fixed, but it can be fixed. So these are just some resources that I've used over the years on blogs, on trying to understand other people's methodology. The help portal is fantastic. They give you a lot of definitions and understanding that. So just to recap on the learning objectives, how you reestablish once it's gone awry. Hopefully you guys understand, like, it's okay, we can reset it. And making projects span for decades, like, what do we consider? Literally everything. You have to think outside of what you typically do as a designer. Who do you talk to? Everyone, and as soon as physically possible. How they behave in different platforms, they're different everywhere. There are no shared coordinates in a Civil 3D file. There are control points. There is an origin. It's all over the place. However, you can mitigate those. You just have to work with your consultants to do it. So there's a bunch of references up on the site. I hope that you check them out and nerd out as much as I do. If not, I will not be offended. But that is our chat for today, and I'd love to take any questions, concerns, and please don't throw anything at me. If there are any of those. Seriously, I shocked you all. Cool. If you have a question, I've been asked to ask you to go to the microphone and direct it just because of our online presence. Because it's so easy for you to get out of the middle of the row. I know it, yes. He's like, I haven't had enough coffee for that.
Mic check, mic check. Okay. Just a quick question. Do you guys use the shared reference point between Civil and Revit? Mm-hmm. Does it work? Does it not work?
It's a mixed bag for me. It really depends on, again, I think some of it depends on how far away those points are. So if Civil decides that they're going to have their control point the actual distance from the origin point itself, like the center of Earth or wherever they're setting it, it doesn't work for us. We've had it. It's more of a manual process, unfortunately.
Have you ever set up shared coordinates that are aligned to a state plane coordinate system?
I have, yes, and
Okay.
I wish I hadn't.
Okay.
This system works for that too, because you're essentially taking everything and telling it exactly where it's going. So just like we did for any kind of control points and the datum itself, you have to coordinate that 100% with your contractor. They're the ones that are almost going to always stipulate that because they want to get in there as soon as possible. They need to feed that information back. If you don't have a contractor yet and your client hasn't hired them, push them as much as you can to say, tell us what we're going to do. They hate to be dictated to. Can't blame them. It's whatever their guys are going to do to get everything built fast enough. Yep.
Does Revit know that state plane coordinate system?
No.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah. You tell it where it is. Like you can physically, the beauty behind the clipping and the unclipping, you can physically place it wherever you want. Does it intelligently? No.
In the example that you were showing up here, you didn't have a work shared project in BIM 360?
Yes, all of them. Almost all of our projects are on 360.
And you know the challenges with that.
Sorry?
The challenge with that, you can't acquire, you have to, or you can't push.
All
you
of
have
them. So 360 is great because of coordination and collaboration, right? However, it will not let you reset all of the time. It used to be more glitchy. It's much better now. You used to have to pull the file down. I know some of you probably had to do that. Reset everything, push that back up. It's gotten much better, especially if you've transitioned your files over to like the ACC portion of the platform. We've not had any base issues. What there is an issue is you can't lock a file, right? So people could still go in it. You can give permissions to everyone outside of your organization, but I still have a lot of people who like to touch things inside of my organization. Beware and just communicate to them like, please don't touch this. I'm begging you, or I will quit. Yeah.
In your opinion, what level do you educate people at different points in the project, to actually handle shared coordinates? Like, do you leave it up to more of the senior team to sort of manage it? And are you educating more junior people on it? Or is it more of a inform and don't touch it? How do you approach it?
I am a huge proponent of education. It's how I learned. I'm self-taught. I didn't have anyone teach me, and I've messed everything up numerous times in my career. So I let my team, my design technology team generally does the setup. However, we always tell people how we're doing it, what it is, how it's there, why it's important to it. If they want to watch us do it or learn, we have no problem teaching them. We do say to anyone who's not interested, like our PMs who have access to the 360 platform, please stop touching things. But teach people. You can't just keep it for yourself. It's not a job security method, please. I would love to never have to do this again, but I do it all the time.
I'm Lindsay, one of her team members. I just want to add to that. So one of the things that we also do is it helps to teach people what we're doing so that they don't touch things. So if we teach them what things look like and how we're doing it, they're less likely to grab the wrong thing at the wrong time.
It's a see something, say something method. Does that work all the time? No, but that's okay.
That's too high for me, but
Me too.
have you ever transitioned from one Revit year for, I don't know, 21 to 22, and then how does that change the shared coordinates? Does it have an impact if you have the shared coordinate file linked to your original files?
Yes, all the time. Does it suck? Yes. However, it's gotten so much better over the years. What I can say is what we do, and what we love about 360 or ACC, it's one button now. What I will tell you about upgrading, if you have to go from 1 year to the next. You cannot upgrade multiple years at a time. You will lose information. I've never had it affect our shared coordinates badly. Have I had it lose physical geometry? Yeah. We have the best luck when you go from 19 to 20 to 20 to 21, et cetera. You have to have somebody who knows what to look for in that. So some of it has to be a designer saying, hey, does everything look kosher here? Sometimes not. Then you have to sit down, and we've worked with Autodesk many times saying, like, can you please upgrade? I don't know what's happening. Why are we losing stuff? They go through your slog files, everything that you can think of. We've never really lost entire, weeks of projects that way. So keep up with your upgrades. That's all I can say. They've made it so much easier for you. So much easier for us. It's worth it. It fixes, hot fixes, all of those things. It will help you out. Anybody else? You're still awake? Cool.
I do have some online questions. Anybody? The first one is, which reference point is considered when the model is exported to the IFC file?
To an IFC? Is that what they said?
Uh-huh.
Okay. When exporting to an IFC, it's the base point is actually done. So it's keeping the survey point that's there. This is the same when you go to a DWG as well. It's going to use your internal origin, which is why we try to stay as close to that as possible. But it'll still say that this is where you're grabbing the coordinates. However, when you have the IFC file, you're almost doing a manual setup all over again, depending on what program you're doing, right? So you're saying, I want to use this as my shared coordinate file versus this one. So you have to make sure that you're exporting the shared coordinate file as well to an IFC, even though it's like there's nothing in it, there's still something in it. It's still the coordinates. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck with I use the building file here, I use the site file here. Giant disaster. Hi.
So from a GC perspective, it's good to see talk of alignments because we see all kinds of disasters that come before us. Just for the designers in the room, the reason why the GCs are so harping on making sure alignment's there, our trade partners are coordinating in Revit nowadays. So a lot of times the design team will put a Band-Aid on it, make their models align, produce drawings, but then we've got to go take this, we've got to go put this stuff in the field. We need real-world coordinates because if you don't have the right NAVD or NAD, all the coordinate systems, if they're wrong, stuff goes in the wrong place and things go haywire, and then we get mad.
And it's schedule impacts. It cascades so badly and can cost a lot of money and time to fix it and redo the work.
And taking this kind of to the next generation of construction where we're laser scanning, we're trying to tie in aerial data. Yep. All that state plane information.
LiDAR, everything has to be on point.
And giving our models back to the design at the end for as-built information. It just makes that whole flow of information go better.
Yeah. No as-builts for me, but thank you. Okay. Anybody else? Good?
Another online question. What about project units? Not many civil engineers use fractions of an inch.
Yes, thank you for asking that, and also I hate you. So yeah, that's true. When setting up coordinates, we don't either. That's important to mention. We're going to use the decimal for it too because we're getting the information from the civil survey. They don't use fractional inches. They don't have the imperial in that way. And it's okay because when you set up the units themselves, for everyone else, they see a fraction. For when we're entering, we have as many of the decimal points as we possibly can when indicating the northing, the easting, and the elevation in there. So we're entering that information when we're typing it in, always in the decimal, never in a fraction, because technically the fraction's rounding. That makes sense? Hopefully that answers the question. So, learn a little about decimals. Who thought we'd actually need math for this job? It's great. Sadly, we do. You have to understand the difference. And to be as accurate as possible, get them to give you as much as you humanly can in terms of decimal, because that is where it's pinpointing in space. Anybody else? My best friend in the back.
Another online one. The questioner asks, can I report the shared coordinates within levels? I mean, can I show both data in levels?
No, you can't. And yes, still important. However, I really wish I didn't have to say this. We've come up with methods to show both. You can jerry-rig a level to show, like with an equation to show where you want it to and reference. Do we like that as a BIM person, as a coordinator, as so much? Only because too, if you want to show both, I understand, but if your contractor is using one reference and you're using another, you're never going to have the great coordination between the two of you. We're on the same point. Even though it's theoretically the same information, it's not. So you're going to get confused really quickly. We're always afraid that our staff is going to turn the right ones and the wrong ones off or not understand what they're using. Can it be done? Yeah, not natively through Revit. They only use one. But you can, work around it through coming up with different level families and the labels that are within those levels. Yes, again, online.
Another one. How do you acquire coordinates from a Navisworks file?
Have I? Yes. Do I like it? No.
The question was, how do you do it?
How do you? Honestly, it's the same thing. Anything that's 3D, so the way you're going to have and bring in Navis into a Revit file too is it's going to end up being like a 3D DWG. So it's the same almost as like a civil survey would be. It gets messier. Again, the more you get out of your native point, so your contractor is probably going to use a Navis file, but it's great if they're using it from where your stuff is. Do they generally? No. Based off of their contract, they're responsible for the accuracy. So everyone is going to sit down and say, I have to redo this work. If you invite them to collaborate earlier on, it's a lot easier that way. Then you'll say, I'm going to do it this way. Does that work for you? Yeah, cool. No extra work all around. Hi.
Hi. Earlier you made a comment that there might be some difference between BIM 360 and ACC with respect to shared coordinates. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, there's no difference in how Revit's handling it. However, if you guys have noticed that BIM 360 is now, it's fading out. There's more options and more things that are available to you if it's an ACC and you've transitioned that project. You can access all your 360 files in the ACC. A lot of people just have it like a bookmark saved in their Chrome or their, God forbid, Internet Explorer situation where they're going to go and wherever they've been for the last 10 years is what they go to again. So ACC and 360 aren't really different in terms of shared coordinates. It's just going to be what's available to you in terms of functionality for that particular site. Does that make sense? Okay. Anybody else? Cool. I'm going to need some water.
You want another one? Okay. The questioner says, do you establish the Revit coordinate reference system to match the civil file CRS to make it easy to link in CAD references?
Yes. So what we try to do, and as much as possible, depending on what the origin is, we will, in setting up that shared coordinate file, we'll acquire the coordinates from the civil survey before we do anything. That's aligning the origins on top of each other and also ensuring that when all of those other files are using the shared coordinate file as their shared coordinate, reference, when they do an export, your DWGs will align, and then the civil engineer doesn't have to realign things manually. It can always happen. When you sit down and receive a file that has origin points 150 miles away, unfortunately, acquiring that, you're going to get a giant error on Revit because it hasn't been able to figure that one out yet. So there are situations where we've had an export file set up so that we can work with the civil engineer and have an easier way to just sit down and say, okay, I'm going to export out of this, and then you'll not have to do extra work. Anytime anybody has to do extra work, it's a pain in the ass. So we try to prevent that as much as possible.
Hi. Has there been any consideration to coordinate with ArcGIS?
Yes and no. Yes, there's consideration. However, and I don't know, it's much easier because they haven't quite gotten there yet. The GeoBIM, I don't know how many of you have experience, takes a lot to set that up, like a lot. They're in beta form, so they're working on it, but it really, the ArcGIS connector is only helping us on an AutoCAD front, so it helps the civil engineer 100%. What I would say is work with your civil engineer to say, hey, are you doing this? Are you pulling it in from Esri? Because they're the ones that are going to function from Civil 3D and AutoCAD majority of the time. It doesn't end up working for us through GeoBIM. Not yet. Hopefully it will. That would be fantastic for rendering, for location, for everything. Oh, you ask and you shall receive. Cool. One more? Sure.
One final question from online. How do you set up point cloud coordinates to be used as shared coordinates?
Why do you guys hate me so much? So I don't set up point cloud coordinates, and to be perfectly honest, I've never done that. However, I have sat with the surveyors or the scans, people who are sitting down and rectifying that. It's a similar reference. From my understanding, it's a similar procedure. However, we've also used scanners, and we do this all the time, where you have an existing building, they go in, and then they'll use our templates to sit down and export out, set up the CAD or the Revit stuff for you. Generally, I've always had to manually place, which is a giant pain in the ass. But it's also, you don't want to link a point cloud in and keep it and make sure it's on its own work set, because that is a disaster and weighs everything down. It'll take, especially if it has, photogrammetry in it. It's very heavy. But if you know how to do it, could you let me know? I'm dead serious. I would love to learn. Anybody else? You're still awake. This is great. Okay. Well, thank you very much, guys. I hope you got something out of it. Appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good day, guys.